Good evening. Glad to be here tonight. Thank you for being here tonight. Lanny is out. And I say the same thing that I say sometimes when I fill in for him or anytime is, you've heard of those people who fill in seats so it looks like there's a lot of people at places. Well, I'm the fill-in guy. That's what I am. I tell people, they ask me about assistant coach. I'm the head basketball coach here at Blackwell, and they asked about the assistants, and I say, best thing an assistant can do is fill in the gaps. Wherever there's a gap, fill it in. Might be driving the bus, might be keeping the scorebook, might be taking part of the team, but fill in the gaps. And that's all I'm trying to do tonight is I'm trying to fill in the gap for Lanny, and obviously he does an awesome job, and he's out, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm filling in the gap. I'm the seat filler. However you want to look at it, that is what I am doing here tonight. I was thinking about what to talk about tonight. I know Lanny's been doing a lot of things of late. And I was just going to kind of go a little bit old school in that we're just going to look at a book of James tonight and read the scriptures and what it says, and obviously any comments or thoughts that you can think of to go along with it. We would talk about. I teach class on Sunday mornings in here in the auditorium, but it's usually about 20 minutes. We do announcements. We go through things about 20. This is going to be a little bit longer tonight. I have done it on Wednesday nights before, but it's going to be a little bit longer. And will we get through the whole thing? Probably not, but we can get through as much as we can. Maybe we can get through the whole thing. What I have handed you is there is in this book, it's kind of like if you're trying to, there's only 5 chapters. I mean, this is not an overly big book, but if we can look at some sections, and if we don't get into some sections, then you can see on here and take this home, this handout, and you can see some certain things that the book talks about in certain sections. And the thing I would say about this book is James skips around a lot in it, but he has an emphasis that he does. And I'm a teacher, or I try to be a teacher, and there's an old saying, nothing is taught until it's learned. And you can teach 1,000 things to somebody, but they may not pick anything up. And it's a lot of times the things that you emphasize that the people learn, the students learn from. And I think what we're going to see tonight is that even though James talks about a lot of different things, he puts an emphasis on one thing in particular. Okay, and we're going to get into that and what that emphasis is, and maybe you pick up more things than that tonight, but if you can walk away just picking up the emphasis that he has, then this has been successful. If we can just take one thing from it tonight. Let's talk a little bit about James first. Now, there's a lot of James in the Bible, okay? But this James is also referred to as James the Just, but also half-brother to Jesus. And he is obviously same mom, but different dads, obviously. His biological dad was Joseph. His biological mom is Mary. This book is considered to be the earliest, anywhere between 45 AD and 48 AD. Okay, so we very well could be looking at the very first book in the Bible, and that was written. And we can go right to this very first verse, and it says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. Let's just stop there for a second. Now, we know James was an apostle. We know he's the half brother of Jesus. But when he introduces himself, I think it's very interesting that he introduces himself not in those ways, but as a servant of God. And some Bibles might say bondservant of God. And what you are going to see with James tonight is that this is a very direct guy. He doesn't beat around the bush. He goes right to what he's trying to say. And this is a letter to early Christians, and probably being more specific, early Jewish Christians with Jewish backgrounds. And he is going to really talk to them in this letter. Now, I'm going to say this right up front. This is not about becoming a Christian. Okay? This is going to be about more of, once you're a Christian, how do you live your life? Okay? Now, I think everybody in here, I'm looking around here, think this is kind of where we're at. So I think it's relevant to us that this is going to be more about how we live our lives as a Christian as opposed to how do you become a Christian. But he does. He comes right off the right and says that he's a servant of God. Now, he could have said those other things, half-brother of Jesus, apostle, but he is more proud of that he is that servant and of the Lord Jesus Christ. He makes that very clear. Now, it says to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. Okay? This is going to a very, very direct people. Okay, that he has in mind that he's going to. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. I just saw your hand. I thought you might have had a question. He is a leader of the church, of a church in Jerusalem. Now, there will be some times in here where, if we get to it, that he does bring about the Gentiles and talks to them, or about Gentiles. Okay, if we get far enough into it. But we do, the first section is James chapter 1, verses 1 through 8, hard times and wisdom. Okay? And I'm going to be reading some. You obviously read to yourself as I read aloud. And it says, trials and temptations. This is in verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let your perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Hey, just right there, he is establishing some things. Another thing about James is this was a man that was very big on prayer. It was said that in some ways that he had knees like a camel because he always prayed. James was a martyr. There was said that one thing that was said is that he was on top of a building and that he was he was knocked off that building. He fell to the ground. When he fell to the ground, he was beat up. And as he was being beat up, when he fell to the ground, he didn't die, but he was being beat up. And he was praying, looking up in the skies, praying to God as he was getting beat up. So you need to know that as we read these things about this book and about him, kind of who this guy is and how direct that he is. And it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. The person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, such as a person that is double-minded and unstable in all they do. What does it mean to be double-minded? If something's double-minded, what does that mean? Okay? If somebody's double-minded, yeah, kind of like they're doing it, they're going both ways, okay, on both sides of the road. They're coming in, they're going a little bit when they're double-minded. And when you're double-minded, at times you will second-guess yourself. You question yourself. You question what's going on. And you're not that consistency, that stability that is looked for in what you do or what people look for you in. There is that unstableness. You're kind of like in the middle of the road. And for a Christian, that is not good. That is not what we're looking for in Christians. You know, when we have Christian, we think of that there is stability. When we look at it, when we look at elders, when we look at deacons, when we look at our preacher, we look at stability. Preachers' wives, elders' wives, deacons' wives, we look for stability there. In verses 9 through 18, it goes into a little bit of, talks about how temptation works. And it says, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. One thing, too, that we're going to see tonight is the responsibility that comes with being in a high position. Doing what I'm doing right now, or what we do as being a teacher. There's so much of the time that we see that much, you've heard that saying, much is given, much is expected of. And James really hits on that a lot. The standards that are held for people, teachers, Christians in general, that the standards are different in how they're judged, which we'll talk a little bit about that also, but how those things come into play. It says, believers, this is verse 9, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. The blossoms fall and the beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. When you hear that word desire, what does it mean to desire something? If you desire something, what does that mean? Yeah, you really want it. Something that you think about all the time and that it makes you want to do a certain thing. Sometimes you can be desired and be really dedicated to wanting that. when you desire it enough. We look at that God, and James talks about this a lot. He talks about how we have rich and we have poor. He's very talks a lot about that in here, in different scenarios. Does the comparison to each. In verse 12, it said, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." What do we know about perseverance? Is it easy to persevere? Is it something that is like our favorite thing to do, is persevere? You know, I know sometimes if I've exercised, you know, I'll be real tired at the end if I've walked or jogged. But it's like a good tired. It's like a tired of, yeah, I'm tired, but I accomplished something. Sometimes that's what perseverance can be when we get through it and we handle it the right way. It can be something that can maybe drain us once we're through it, but we have that good feeling at the end that, you know, that we got through it. You know, and again, these are things that James really hits home with. These things of trials and tribulations and perseverance, and how they continue to make us grow and make us better. He also goes into verse 12 or verse 13. It says, "When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does the tempt anyone." What's the difference between being tested and being tempted? Because we say a lot of times, we say God tests us. God is testing us. But we know right here he's not tempting us. What would be the difference between being tested and being tempted? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you feel like you've been tested by God? Do you feel like there's times you've been tested? Why do you think, if you've been tested, why do you think God would test you? Okay. Maybe build up that perseverance a little bit. You know, I remember one time, it was a preacher was telling, in a Bible class, he was saying, you know, if you pray for patience, be ready to be patient. If you praying for perseverance, you know, be ready to handle perseverance. Those are, and you know, and again, you got to remember, James is writing this letter. I really feel like that James here is trying to establish things. I mean, he's really trying to, you know, we're talking about early Christians here. He's trying to establish and make the point of, okay, you did this, but this is how you have to live your life. This is how it has to be done. Verse 16, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." We just got through talking about double-mindedness. And now it says here that God is not like a shifting shadow. How does that make you feel? to know that you have a God that's not double-minded, is not. He is that steady. He is that rock. Makes you feel good knowing what you're doing. That if you're living your life the way that he wants you to, that you're doing the right thing. He's not going to pull the rug out from under your feet. I want to go back up a second. It says, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. You ever notice how much when the Bible is talking about God, that the word light is used? That's a big deal. You know, it's cloudy outside right now, but I will say this. Sometimes when the clouds break, it's been raining, and the clouds break, and that sun comes through, there is a little good feeling like, oh, the sun's coming out. You know, I'm not saying I'm jumping for joy and going, hey, but I'm just saying that is a good feeling when that sun breaks through and that light's there and that sunlight is there. But that word light is used quite a bit when it comes with God and Jesus. It's like it's part of them. The light is part of them. We like light. I mean, we read. We can read with light. We can see people with light. We can see what we are eating. We can see what we're drinking. We can, if we don't have light, if we're in a dark room and we can't see, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what's going on. Like we like light. So two things there. One is it's coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. And you can imagine right there, heavenly lights, that's pretty bright. That's not just any light, that's a bright light. You guys ever been bright lighted before by another car? There's a difference between bright lights and when they put them on dim, isn't there? And then it says, who does not change like shifting shadows? So not only is he a bright light, he does not going to change. He's not going to shift on you. The verse 18, he chose to give birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. Okay, again, that word first fruits, that's a deal telling you that he's talking to some early Christians, trying to establish some things. It's a generation, the kind of a first generation of Jewish Christians that he is addressing this letter to. Now, the next one, in verse, the third section, James chapter 1, verses 19 through 26, being doers and not only hearers. We're getting to where he's emphasizing. You know, we talked about the emphasis. He's talked about a lot of different things already, but we're going to get into what he's really emphasizing here. Verse 19, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Have you ever heard the saying, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth? You ever heard that? What's the second part of that? He gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth so you can listen twice as much as you speak. It's one of those oldies but goodies, right? It's been around a while. Probably said a lot. You know, obviously most of the time we're saying this to youth, you know. My dad used to say little boys are made to be seen, not heard. My dad used to say that all the time. There is thing about Jesus is he was an excellent listener. He really listened. I don't really hear that a lot about him. I mean, we know and we'll talk about this, he spoke eloquently and he spoke and chose the right words. But he listened. You know, the more you read, the better the writer you're going to be. The more you read, or the better the writer you are, the better you'll speak. The better you listen, the better you understand things. And again, this is where we really, and James is saying this with Jesus, is that before he just went about saying whatever, he listened to everyone. We know, people who are recovering alcoholics, their first step is that they have to know that they're an alcoholic. Now, that's not the end-all, be-all. That's just step one. But it is step one, is that an alcoholic has to, realize that they're an alcoholic. And we're going to get to a big verse here. Let's go ahead and go to verse 20. Because human anger does not produce the righteous that God desires, therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted to you. And I want to come back to that a second, which can save you. And I want to come back to that a second. But let's go to verse 22 for a second. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Terril, tell me, of all this book, Terril, you tell me one single scripture in this book that I need to pay attention to. Tell me just one. Well, verse 22 might be it. I mean, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. You look at that little phrase there, do what it says. That's not James saying, hey, you might want to think about this. Or, hey, you might want to consider this. This is James just coming right out and saying, do what it says. He is emphasizing right here that listening is great, but you also have to do what it says. You can't just listen. You can't just read. You have to do what it says. And it's important to listen. It's important to read. It's important to do. It's very important. But you have to do what it says. Verse 23, anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Have you ever forgotten what you look like before? You ever looked in the mirror? Now, here's the thing. Sometimes we look in the mirror and we look at it and we're looking at ourselves. How do we look? Okay? But what James is saying here is we go in that mirror and we look, okay? We're looking at ourselves. We're not just looking at ourselves to see how we look, but what can we do better? Maybe we brush our teeth. Maybe we have to comb our hair. Okay? Maybe we have to shave, guys. It's not just looking at yourself and, okay, this is how I look. But what do I have to do when I look at myself in the mirror and get better? Now, that's just a general speaking deal. But if we go there and we listen and we read things, but we don't do, he's comparing this to like you're looking at yourself in the mirror and then you walk away and you don't remember what you look like. That's hard for us to imagine, isn't it? I mean, it's very hard. If we were all artistes, which I am not, but if we were, we could draw our face really well, couldn't we? So that is an extreme comparison, but that's how James talks. That's how James gets his point across. And then it goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently, what does intently mean? If you look intently at something, what are you looking at? What does that mean, intently? You're locked in, aren't you? You are locked in on that. If you are intently looking at something, you are zeroing in on that. If you, I don't know, but if you were underlining a word in your Bible or you were highlighting something on your phone or whatever, highlight that word intently or underline it in your Bible or highlight it. That's a key word right there in this paragraph. Intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it. They will be blessed in what they do. A word that now has to enter our mind is the word works, W-O-R-K-S. He is starting to emphasize doing things and works. Okay? He is starting to begin to emphasize that. Now, it says in verse 26, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves. We're going to talk about tongues here in a minute. Deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. How about that word worthless? That's like one of the worst words that you can use. Whether you're saying it about something, you could be saying it about a horse, you could be saying it about a tractor, you say something is worthless, you're basically saying it's zero. It's nothing. If something is worthless, it doesn't work. It's not good. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So, we look at this right here, and he is saying here at the end here that we are to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Us as Christians need to look after people and help people in ways that they need help. We can't just say, hey, you know what? That person needs a coat to wear when it's cold outside. We have to give them a coat. We can't just say, that person needs a ride. We have to give them a ride. It's not just Well, we recognize it, but we don't do anything with it. We have to do something with it. That's what James is saying our responsibility is. We look at things, and like I said, we're going to get into the tongue here in a minute, but a bridled tongue. Anybody want to take a guess what they think that means? A bridled tongue? You don't hear the word bridled a whole lot. We're going to talk more about it in a minute. Yep. Right. Yes, ma'am. That's right. Having control. That's what we're always striving, aren't we? Control. Seems like that's a constant battle for us that we're always trying to is get control. It's like if we could get control of things, you know, it's like whenever you're starting to do a job or you have work of some kind that you're doing, it's like I got to get control of the situation. Now, once I get control of the situation, I'm good. You know, I can organize it. I can get it the way that I want, you know. But that word control is always something that we're striving for. In whatever it is we're doing, or whatever it is that we have, is that word control. Is we're always trying to get it in there. All right, let's go to chapter 2. All right, verses 1 through 13, and it's entitled "Genuine Faith Among God's People." All right, my brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. You ever showed favoritism before? You don't have to raise your hand or answer on that. Is there favoritism in this world? I'm sorry, what? Yeah. Is favoritism part of this world? And I feel like sometimes we don't want to admit that there's favoritism, or like we don't. I don't want to say. I want to say like we don't want to admit that it's going around all the time. It's like something sometimes we want to sidestep. You know, there's not. You know, it's not that. You know, but it is, and it's in all things, isn't it? I watch. Yes, sir. Right.
But I think he's also telling us be careful with it because you're doing it for your own reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Not because you should.
Yes, sir. Yep, I agree. In verse 2 it says, "Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in the filthy clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, you stand there or sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" Now my first question here is he saying be mean to the rich person? He's not, is he? He's not saying be mean. He's just saying don't treat the poor person less. Okay? Now, some people can read that and they're saying, well, he's saying you don't need to treat. I mean, you know, you can turn a verse. A lot of people can turn a verse in a lot of ways, can't they? Some could look at it and say, well, he's saying don't be good to the rich man. That's not what I don't think that's what he's saying there. I think he's saying, no, that's fine, but you got to treat the poor man that way too. Yeah. He says, it says, listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith, to inherit the kingdom that he promised those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him whom you belong? So he looks at it, and I'm going to skip a little bit. Let's go down to verse 10. It says, for whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. What is that scripture? I'll read it again. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. Also, I think we can't just pick and choose what we want to do right and what we don't want to do right. We're held accountable. We can't just pick and choose what we want to do and what we don't want to do. It goes on there, it says, for he who said you shall not commit adultery also said you shall not murder. If you do not commit adultery but do commit murder, you have become a lawbreaker. So, it doesn't matter which one you do wrong, adultery or murder, whichever one you do is going to be wrong. You're going to be a lawbreaker either way. Go to, at the very end, go to verse 12, very end. I think this is it's part of this scripture, but mercy triumphs over judgment. What about that? Real good news, isn't it? Like, if we could make a t-shirt, we would make it. That right there. And we would wear it. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Now, we're going to be judged, right? We're going to be judged. But knowing that mercy triumphs over that, I don't know about you, but that makes me feel good. That makes me feel real good. In verse 14, James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26, we're getting through time here. Still a couple of things I want us to talk about. I want to get your thoughts on. Dead faith and living faith. Go to down to verse 17. In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. If something's dead, it does nothing, does it? Doesn't move, doesn't do anything. And he comes right out and says that faith, it's not saying that faith's not important, but just by itself, it is not accompanied by action. It is dead. So there is a dead faith. Go down to verse 19. You believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. So again, we go back to kind of what we talked about before. It's like knowing is great, and we do need to know. But it's part of it. It's part of it. It's not just the whole thing. And again, this is what he's emphasizing. Even though he's talking about a lot of different things, he does come back to this. Faith needs works. Faith needs doers, not just hearers. Okay? It's great to hear. It's great to know. Great to understand. But there has to be doing also. Go to verse 24. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. So he just keeps hitting this point. He's got this point. We're kind of in the middle of James now a little bit, and we're getting to his whole thing, that he wants to make sure that these early Christians understand that you are learning, you are knowing, but you've got to go out and do it. You have to go out and do it. It's like, I'm a basketball coach, but you can have the greatest game plan in the world, but if it's not executed, is it a good game plan? It's not. It might have been a good thought, but if it's not executed, then it doesn't work. I can get a player to lay the ball up or in a position to score, but if he doesn't score, if he doesn't make the basket, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It was a good thought, but it wasn't executed. It wasn't done the way that it was supposed to be done. All right, let's go to chapter 3. Let's talk about taming the tongue. We got a little bit of time left here. The power of the tongue. And I'm just going to tell you that you don't even have to read this whole chapter, but you read James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, and you'll walk away thinking, wow, what is this thing right here? What is that? James, if you asked me, Terril, compare James to another book in the Bible, what would be another book that you would compare it to? It's probably about as close to Proverbs as it could be. You can read Proverbs and you can see a lot of things, especially with the tongue, that goes with James. I have it written down. If I could have it written down somewhere. Go to Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. If you want to know how powerful the tongue is. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. Basically, what that chapter says, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but it's basically death and life are in the power of the tongue. Death and life in the power of that right there. Is what it says in Proverbs. Now, I'm going to go to verse 4 in chapter 3. It says, or take ship. He uses two comparisons here, okay? There's two things that he uses to give examples of it. Take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, okay? And then the other one right above it's what we were just talking about, the bit in a horse's mouth. Now, horses weigh like 1,000 pounds, okay? They weigh a ton. But someone that weighs 160 pounds By the way, that's not what I weigh, but wish I did. One time I could weigh that. But someone that weighs 160 pounds can make 1,000-pound, a one-ton horse go a certain way because of that bit in the mouth. Now, you take these gigantic ships, and this one rudder can make the whole ship go whichever way it wants. And it's like, how is that possible? That something so little can have such an effect on something so big in making which way it goes. Those are great examples of what the tongue is like. And, we go back to that word control. And, you can go through and you can list a lot of sins. You could write a list of sins. And there's going to be a majority of them that has to do with the tongue. I mean, the tongue could have about as much of a majority of it as anything. You go through and you can talk about all the sins and list them all and stuff right there. And the tongue can be part of a great deal of them. It says, obviously strong winds, it holds it. It says, consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and itself set on fire by hell. You guys, you've seen on TV, maybe some of you've seen in real life, these big fires, these that just cover acres and acres and destroy property all over. And it was started, some of them are started by this tiny little spark. And it can just wipe out a countryside. And something so little started it. Goes on in verse 8, it says, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. So he says no human can tame it. Well, Terril, how do we tame it? If no human can tame it, he also goes on later and says we can tame all kinds of animals. All kinds of animals. You guys have seen these killer whale shows. These people have killer whales that do these tricks. They train them. Killer whales, they're huge. People can train them to do tricks, to jump through hoops, to do it. We can train all kinds of animals. But we have a hard time training our tongue. So how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we train it? How do we handle it? The man that's been on this earth that handled his tongue better than anybody was Jesus. He was always in total control of his tongue. Now, we talked about how he was a great listener, but he was always in total control of his tongue. And that's kind of how we've got to handle it. We've got to handle it in a way that we've got to turn it over to him and let him handle it. We've got to let him, because no human can do it, we kind of have to step back and let him handle it and do it. There's so much more. We're about to run out of time. We're not going to get through, but we got through about half of it. But this book is it's about being practical. What does it mean to be practical? If something's practical, what does that mean? If it's practical, makes sense, something we do every day. I I think that's a big deal, is we got to know, how do we handle everyday stuff, everyday situations? What can we take from a Bible class, from a sermon, from a devotional? What can I take that I can use in everyday life, in everyday situations? And that's what's going on right here. And like I said, this is not about becoming a Christian. This is about once you are a Christian. And I didn't even get into what the teachers, the responsibility of a teacher. It's all, that you carry when you're doing it. Okay? All right. I'm a little bit new at this, so I'm going to try to handle this the best way I can. We're going to go into announcements. We only got a couple of minutes left. We're going to go ahead and go into announcements. Thank you for joining us tonight and for being here tonight.